everyone, it's Susan from the Sacramento History Museum, and I'm here to tell you the story of a dark and stormy night in the year 1861. It was cold and rainy that evening in December when the rains started coming down, and they didn't stop for months. Wait a minute, hold. You're going to learn all about that story when you take our underground tour, which is starting again this month here in April. I don't have to go over. Take the tour. You're going to love learning all about the history of Sacramento and why we raised the city. Let's look instead at some of the things that we are not featured on the tour here. So let's take a look. I'm here in the underground space. I'll show you around. We're going to take a look at some of the things you don't normally get to see when you're on the tour. So here we are walking up into the underground space that is below B.F. Hastings. Now you might notice here a lot of brick archways supporting the building above us, and maybe you already know that archways are actually one of the best ways to support something that is very, very heavy, and that's why you have all of very thick brick walls with archways in them in order to kind of distribute the weight of the building above. So when you do come down on the underground tour, have appreciation maybe for these archways that are literally putting in a lot of effort to keep the building above us up there. Now, usually we don't go into the part of the underground space. So let's take a look at what some of the things are that this really special. Now, in the 1860s, the city, everybody in the city kind of changed. We flooding all the time. And so one of the things that they did was they had to the levees around the river as well. Sacramento has two major rivers that go through it. Normally get to see while on the tour shows this process of raising the levees. Over here we have the levee being raised. It was actually paid for by the Central Pacific Railroad, who said, okay, we'll help pay for this if we can put our tracks on top of it. And that's what happened. That's why the tracks are on top of the levee in order to make it the high ground so that the railroad could be on the high ground of the levee. So that's what this picture here is depicting, is the levees. Oh, I see that some are saying the audio is breaking up a little. Honestly, I think it's just because I'm underground, and so it can be a little bit hard down here, but I'll try and go slowly so that we don't break up too much, okay? Now, another thing, of course, is that we had to move the rivers. So this picture over here depicts where the rivers originally were. Here is the Sacramento River, which is still in its original place. And here is actually the American River. This building right there, that is our museum, the Sacramento History Museum. It's still there, but obviously now the river is not right behind it. So the American River had to get moved. Also, where I'm standing, or where I am underneath, I guess, is the B.F. Hastings building, which would be at this corner right there. So here's the Sacramento River, and then the American River, which got moved during this process as well. Now, a lot of these things depict, that even though they did all of these different engineering feats in order to try and beat the flooding every year, unfortunately Sacramento still floods. This is one of the more recent ones that happened. I think this one was still maybe in the 1970s, but you can see that Sacramento does still flood. So despite all of the efforts, you can't stop Mother Nature no matter what. This picture here too, this happened after a lot of the buildings were raised. It happened after the levees were raised. It happened after the river had been moved. And you can't stop the water. So all that you can do. Now, one of the more interesting things I think that happened when they were raising the buildings was it was actually a crime to do it improperly or to not repair it properly. So we have pictured here too oh, I see it's backwards. That's okay. We tried to fix that, but it happens. Is we've got 3 names here of kind of prominent Sacramento citizens, one of Thomas Clooney, Henry Ames, and Mark Hopkins, who are charged with neglecting to construct a sidewalk or neglecting to repair a sidewalk. So it was actually a crime not to do this. What that means is, let's come look over here at some more of these that maybe you won't get a chance to see as you're going on your tour, is if you were a business owner, you were in charge, it was your own money that you had to raise your building. So this is what the underground looks like. It's not necessarily that it's underground, it is now today, but it was actually, this was ground level for your building. You raised it up, you can see the brick arches, very reminiscent of what we have down here, right? So if you were a business owner and you had your building raised up like this, well, you were also in charge of raising the sidewalk in front of your building up as well. The city would take care of the road, but you also had to raise your sidewalk. So what those gentlemen were accused of was neglecting to construct the sidewalk, and that was in fact a crime. And it is kind of interesting if you get a chance to read that. Here, we'll go back to it. I'm sorry that it's backwards, but they are, violating a city ordinance here, but then the people around them are also charged with disturbing the peace and like all sorts of things that are maybe a charge of assault, like, or maybe to my mind at least a little bit more, a little bit worse, or a little bit more dangerous at least. So that's what, but that was a crime still too. And a lot of these down here, you can see the different crimes that are right in line with neglecting to construct the sidewalk. Now, the sidewalk is a really interesting part of Sacramento history. We're going to walk through these archways this way, okay? Because in the 1970s, when we were kind of redeveloping old Sacramento, legend has it that these sidewalks were discovered. They didn't know that they were there, that these hollow sidewalks were there. And so, oh my goodness, there's this labyrinth of tunnels underneath Sacramento that are there because of these hollow sidewalks. Well, I hate to break it to you, but that's just not really true. Yes, there are hollow sidewalks. We've got pictures of them, discovering these hidden things, but they don't really go anywhere. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Redevelopment, a lot of places would just kind of, the hollow sidewalks would collapse under redevelopment or would get filled in over time. And also, they just aren't connected. They're kind of in front of certain places, but they don't, connect necessarily to each other. So I do hate to break it to you, but there is no labyrinth of tunnels underneath Sacramento. There are some hollow sidewalks that still exist, and in fact, I can show you again where I was and where I started because I was in one of them. This is what they look like. They've got the buttresses. You'll learn a lot more about that when you take your underground tour. Okay, so, but I do want to point out some other things here too. This is, of course, an original brick wall that was constructed when the building was raised. You can tell because it's, kind of falling apart here, but that's okay. We aren't going to touch it. I always like to look at how much dust there is on the ground personally. Maybe you would miss that on your tour, but I like to look. I think it's very interesting, just like, ooh, what's happening to this wall? Now, another thing I really enjoy about this building in particular is, again, this was B.F. Hastings' building, and he was a banker. Now, the building had a couple other things in it, Wells Fargo Bank, the Supreme Court, that sort of thing. But the Hastings building was a bank. And so here in this part of the underground, you can actually see it's got an extra brick wall here, and that's because the vault was above this place. When they raised the building, they put the vault above this, and I guess we're assuming it was just full of gold. And so that means that they needed extra support for this very heavy vault, hence the building of that extra wall right there. And we've got a picture here of somebody in the 1970s actually excavating this space, and I think that's so neat too. So that would have been right here in that space, a lady excavating it here and putting different, dirt and whatnot. You can see her wheelbarrow there too. Now over here, this picture I really like as well. It's a little bit dark here, that's okay. It's kind of spooky. But this is a picture of the excavation. You can see the date. It's January 12th, 1972. It's Hastings Bank Building Basement, Unit 4. And they're digging this out. They're doing excavations here. And it was in this space right here, which is pretty cool. So let's go look at some of the items that they actually found when they were excavating this space in the 1970s for the redevelopment of Old Sacramento. We actually have them, a lot of the pieces, or some of the pieces I should say, in these cases here. These cases themselves are not necessarily on the tour either. We talk again a lot more about why the city was raised and how, and go into detail on that. We don't necessarily get to take a deep look at these items here, so let's do that now. Back here, we've got some metal ornamental kind of pieces. Perhaps they were on the walls or maybe fireplace, that sort of thing. We've got some metal silverware. We've got a lot of oyster shells. There's always oyster shells found. That was just kind of a staple of the food at the time. We have a spigot that was specifically for a barrel, so not necessarily for like a water spigot, I guess, but for probably a beer barrel or something like that. And we have china here with a really pretty blue and white pattern on it. And then we have just, I mean, you always find so many bottles when you're doing digs like this. And I personally think they're really pretty. I love that blue color that historic bottles tend to come in. I really like the bottle. Let's see if I can put my finger on it right there, that bottle right here. That's an inkwell. So that one would have actually held ink in it. Kind of reminds me of like I don't know, the space shuttle or something like that, the shape of it there. But I just think it's really, really pretty. The deep blue one there, also I should say, I'm sorry I can't get closer, it's behind a case. But that deep blue one is a glass cameo. So it's like a jewelry piece. And I think that's really, really pretty too. Lots of glass vials, different signs were discovered here, of course. And then over here, we've got even more items that were discovered in this area. Like I said, the Wells Fargo bank was also here, so we have a couple of different examples of what they might have had here. This one here, I know it's backwards, but it says John Denver, Sacramento, California. That is in fact the John Denver that Denver, Colorado is named after. And then we have more items that would have probably been very common back then that is maybe different to us today. But we've got our horseshoes here. We have more of the china, only this time in a black instead of a blue. China ink on there. Broken bottles. In the back there, those big ones over here, those are meat bones. So I don't know, somebody was eating and threw it out their window. Who knows? But I think the really crazy thing that's in this case is that that skeleton right there. That's a cat skeleton. So why that was here or why we kept it here on display, I don't know. Kind of interesting. We've got a cat skeleton in this one. And then just other bottles. So all these items were actually discovered when we were doing excavations in B.F. Hastings in this site here. So that's what that's all about. That's what all of these cases here are. We'll go backwards this way. You can see, again, you'll get a much closer view when you do your underground tour, just not necessarily of some of those cases. And finally here, we've got this really beautiful crown molding. I just think it's gorgeous. Look at that. Look at the detail here. Wow. So this crown molding was on the interior of the B.F. Hastings building. That's why it's here now. It's very elegant. I mean, if you can imagine what Sacramento was like in the 1860s, in the 1870s, in the 1880s, this isn't a town on the East Coast that had been there a lot longer. Sacramento was a new city, and to have this kind of Italian-inspired architectural thing here, like this is pretty fancy. This shows some wealth here too. So that's why this is here. It is the original, so I'm not going to touch it, I guess. But this is the crown molding. It's quite large. If you when you come and take your underground tour, you'll see that this is almost, it's almost 2 feet tall. It's quite large here, and it would have been on the inside of the B.F. Hastings Bank. So let me turn it around. Hi. So I hope that that was kind of a fun little sneak peek of what's in some of these underground spaces that isn't necessarily on the underground tour. But the underground tours are open again. You can get your tickets now. We're doing it on a limited basis, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. So tickets will go pretty fast. So make sure you get your tickets soon. And we hope to see you here in Old Sacramento. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.